Hello and welcome to Kaleidoscope, the podcast. My guest today is Sarah Laverty. We met through Northern Ireland Business, which is a wee app, a social media app, shall we say, that I don't know about you, Sarah, but I have found very, very helpful with my business. And it's very, very popular in Northern Ireland. Thanks to Tim and the guys for running that for us. Um, you're very welcome on today, Sarah. Thank you very much for coming and agreeing to do this. The four questions, the podcast is all about change and transformation. The four questions are: what was life like before the change, during the change, after the change, and what does the future hold? Not that any of us have a crystal ball, but what would you like it to be? I'm going to pass it over to you, and you, as always, with any of my guests, can talk about whatever change you want to talk about.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you so much for having me. So, as you say, my name is Sarah. I am an embodiment coach and I help women to develop unshakable self trust and confidence by getting out of their heads and into their bodies. And really, that is the journey and the transformation that I went through, which I'll tell you about. So, to do that, I need to take you back to 5 year old Sarah. So, 5 year old Sarah was very, very sensitive. She was very shy. She was very quiet. She didn't really speak outside the house. In fact, one day her best friend went home and excitedly told her mother that Sarah spoke to her today because it had been months that we had been friends and I had yet to speak. But she also had a very, very active mind. I always had a very active mind, very active imagination, very vivid dreams, and really good at learning. So the second I got to school, I discovered that my brain is built in the way that really fits our academic system. And I was a very ferocious reader and really loved learning. So, what I was learning from a very young age is that the world is a bit overwhelming. The primary school I went to was very big, very noisy, lots of other kids that I didn't really know all that well how to interact with. So, the world was a bit overwhelming, but my mind was a safe place. That was somewhere that I could always retreat to, and that was somewhere that I was good at. I could find solace in my schoolwork. And even from that young age, I can start to see some traces and some traits of anxiety and OCD, which is unsurprising for someone who had a very developed mind, but who found emotions and sensation overwhelming. So I remember getting funny tummies before tests on a Friday, but like really, really strongly not being able to handle this Friday spelling test. I remember sometimes touching objects in a certain order around my house, which would let me feel just a little bit calmer. But I never would have told anyone around that about that because I didn't see what that was or know that it was anything weird. And I was also very, very sensitive to other people. So I hated, any experience of being shouted at, for instance, by a teacher or being told off. I just found that completely and utterly overwhelming. So I was also learning that the best way for me to get by is to be very good and to do what I'm told and to do exactly what other people want of me. And that's how I can best protect myself. So I grew up, and as I grew up, I started to come out of my shell. As I got into my teenage years, I started to become a bit more confident, a bit more outgoing. I actually started doing some acting, public speaking, debating. It's amusing to people now to think that I didn't speak when I was younger because now public speaking is one of the main things that I do. But I naturally went through this process. However, I also experienced a really difficult thing in my teenage years. My dad had had very serious heart conditions his whole life, and he'd been in and out of hospital when I was a child. But when I was 14, he sadly passed away from that. And for the last year of his life, he really deteriorated. And that was a really difficult time. And I feel like the adults around me did the best they could, but that I didn't really receive the emotional support to go through the grief that I would have needed. And particularly as a sensitive child who felt things really deeply, I just found this, I didn't really know how to handle this. So what did I do? I used the common coping mechanism of going into my mind. I remember doing things like compartmentalizing days into specific categories. I remember counting my steps sometimes, but I also poured myself into my schoolwork. And to be honest, it was normal for me to do that because I was going into GCSE and A level time. So I ended up leaving school with really, really high grades and feeling like, okay, well, at least I can settle there. Now, throughout my whole teenage years, I can see that there were periods of anxiety focused on a particular topic. I had a period of time where I was really, really anxious about religion and figuring out what did I believe about that. I was really, really anxious for a little while about climate change. I was really, really anxious about world affairs. Now, these are all things that it's perfectly normal to have some level of overwhelm or confusion or anxiety about, but I can now look back and see that this was my mind picking a topic to think if we can just figure this out, we'll feel a little bit calmer, because it would go on for a period of months and then it would almost be like left behind. Until in my early 20s, it discovered one topic that could crush me even more, which is when I developed relationship anxiety and OCD. So, relationship anxiety and OCD is when you experience intrusive thoughts or compulsive behaviors relating to a romantic relationship. And I would say that if for people who know a bit about attachment theory, it can often be most associated with like disorganized attachment, which is where you have a mixture of anxious and avoidant traits about you. And this is more than what you might receive support for in like Cosmopolitan magazine. Do I like this guy? What does he think of me? This is a much stronger level. So I had met someone who I had the opportunity of like a real commitment with, and my nervous system went into complete freak out mode. I had always struggled a little bit with relating to others, even though I'd had friends. This was my level of overwhelm. And added to that, with my dad's death, relationships had such higher stakes for me. So my nervous system shut down. I can see that I went into numbness and also overdrive at the same time. I would have hours and hours of rumination. I can remember sitting on my bedroom floor, Googling symptoms or Googling what should I do for hours at a time and forgetting to eat, forgetting to go to the bathroom. So it was the thing that differentiates it from someone just having some ordinary anxiety in a relationship is it was really debilitating and taking over my life. But at that time, I think I was 20. I had no real knowledge of mental health, and my friends and people around me didn't really either. This was maybe 13 years ago. Yes, so 13 years ago. So this was before we've had more access to this knowledge in recent times. So I didn't really know what was going on. And eventually, I think I just ended up sort of moving away from that space, falling into a bit of a depression for a while as well. But it coincided with a time when I was doing a year abroad. So I moved away, got some space, was able to focus on other things for a while, and sort of settled down a little bit. But I came home, I got into another relationship, and it appeared again. And this is when I was like, okay, there's something going on here. This is not just about who I'm with or what relationship I'm in. I wouldn't even have connected it to my wider anxiety issues at that point at all. But I was like, I don't think I want to be this worrying person for the whole of my life. So I went to therapy for the first time. I went to cognitive behavioral therapy. And at the time, that was really, really transformative, because it was the first time that anyone had ever told me that I am not my thoughts and I don't have to agree with everything that my thoughts contain. My therapist also said at that point, you think your feelings, but you don't feel them. And that's important. But I will say he didn't really do anything at that point to help me learn how to feel them. That came later down the line. Now, CBT was great for that time, but the only thing that I will say is it felt like it got me to a certain point and no further, because it teaches you how to combat your thoughts, it teaches you how to tackle your mind. But I was literally trained in debating. So I could argue anything. I could argue anything at all that I wanted. So it was a relief to know that what my mind was yapping at me about all the time wasn't the full truth. But I had no real way of knowing, well, what is the truth and what do I like and what do I care about? So this was all the pre-transformation, and we're now about to enter the transformation itself. There was already moments of transformation there, but this is the big moment. And this was when life gave me something that I could not think my way out of. So when I was in my mid-20s, when I was 26, I found out that I had a rare heart condition and I needed to be fitted with a pacemaker. So as you can imagine, for someone who had lost their dad to heart disease in my teenage years, this was even more devastating than it would be to an average person who that would be frightening for anybody. I literally ended up on the same wards that I used to visit my dad on whenever I was a child. And third degree heart block is basically a problem with the electrical system in your heart. It's like a little fault in the line. And it meant that I had a very slow heart rate. My heart rate was at around 40 beats per minute. Sometimes in my sleep, it was dropping into the 30s. And the risk was that if it dropped too low, I could go into cardiac arrest. And even if it didn't go quite that far, I could start fainting because my body wasn't pumping enough blood around my body. So, being told that you have a higher risk of suddenly dying at any moment is enough to make anybody completely freeze. And it really was a situation that my mind couldn't think its way out of. I simply had to be with what was happening and be in the moment. Within a few days of leaving hospital, having first found this out, I didn't get my pacemaker for 9 months because I wasn't an emergency case. The reason being because I actually had very good heart rate variability. So my heart rate was very good at rising when I was doing more activity and dropping down. So it wasn't actually an emergency situation. However, it was a very anxious time to know that my heart is not working properly and the little machine that can help it out is not yet with me. So, a few days after I left hospital, having decided that I was going to do what I'd always done, throw myself back into work and carry on as normal, I had my first anxiety attack. So, despite years of anxiety, I'd never actually had a full on like attack. And it hit me in the middle of town, and I thought that I was having a heart episode because the symptoms of an anxiety attack are the same as what you would have if you were about to faint from my condition or if you were going into cardiac arrest. So this was completely debilitating. And I will say that that first anxiety attack turned into multiple daily anxiety attacks for the next 9 months. And this completely took over my life. It seemed to hit worst when I was doing things that I enjoyed, when I was browsing Waterstones. I remember, if I was browsing Waterstones that seemed to hit there, I'd have to run out of the shop. I remember one time crawling along the Lisburn Road, phoning a friend to come and pick me up because I just couldn't get to the bus stop. I went to see Shania Twain with my mum, and I had multiple panic attacks before we got there. So she walks with a walking stick, and the agreement was that I could make it through the concert if I held on to her walking stick and sort of gradually calmed down during it. But all in all, at this point, I hated my body. I was in utter hatred for my body. Not only had I been struggling in my relationships with feelings of numbness and all this confusion for years, now my heart wasn't working. And on top of that, anxiety attacks were taking over my daily life. So I felt like my body was my enemy. And I was utterly devastated and just furious with it. About 2 months after that first anxiety attack, I got some counselling on the NHS and went in and I told the person, everything about what had been happening. And at that point, I was up to high-do. I had been having daily panic attacks. And at that point, I hadn't even been called for the first of my heart investigations, which would be what would allow me to get, a pacemaker down the line. And that counsellor, I have to say, was fantastic. I told them everything that had been going on, and I expected to have a similar session as I would have had in CBT of talking about, reframing your thoughts or, developing new beliefs. But we didn't do any of that. She instead basically gave me a social prescription of having 2 to 3 Epsom salt baths a week, getting lots of sleep, eating really healthy food, and not focusing on this bigger issue of how was I going to process all of this just for the next 2 weeks. And some people will hear that and think, oh, what a cop off, like that just sounds, like you could get that advice online, you could do that. I cannot emphasize enough how much my brain needed a really simple permission slip to just do nothing and to just focus on now. And at the same time, as well, I was also going to stress control classes, which are offered free on the HSC, and starting to learn about how the nervous system actually works and how our nervous system response plays out in our daily life. I came back to the next counselling session 2 weeks later, and my anxiety attacks had reduced by about 50%. And that hit me like a ton of bricks, that my body was actually part of the equation. And although it hadn't, solved the problem that I was going through in life, I felt calmer in my mind. I felt a little bit more able to handle what was happening. And it was completely revolutionary to me at that point to discover, because for my whole life, I had thought if I could just think hard enough about this, if I could just figure this out, then I can feel calm. And it was the revolutionary thing was to discover that I need to let myself get to a place of calm before my mind can figure anything out. And it completely flipped things on its head. I'm going to fast forward you a bit. I got my operation, my anxiety attacks, reduced. I got that reassurance. I went through the recovery, still got my pacemaker, obviously. He's called Percy. That's all going well. And I ended up, kind of re-engaging with my life a bit. I got a new job that was really great. I got into a new relationship, and then the pandemic hit. So we were all stressed, and that wasn't fun. But in a way, the experience I'd had up to that point gave me a little bit of preparation for a big, uncontrollable life event happening around you. But if we go into late 2020, which is, I think, when we were all struggling, that second lockdown that was so difficult, I was in a long distance relationship that wasn't going very well. And it was partly due to pandemic issues, but about November time, relationship OCD, anxiety, flared its head again. But this time, I had the knowledge of my nervous system. This time it was different. This time I knew, oh, there's something way more going on here. So within a few days of feeling it come on, unlike previous times where it had gone on for months and months, within a few days, I had started seeking out support, which was based in the body. And I didn't even know at that point what language to use around this. I hadn't heard somatic, I hadn't heard embodiment at that point. I was just Googling as much as I could body based relationship anxiety and trying to see what I could discover. And that's when I came upon Healing Embodied. So, Healing Embodied is an organization that treats relationship anxiety and OCD through embodiment practices. It's run by two women who are dance therapists who have developed this body of work. And I had a consultation with them about going on to one of their programs, and the person guided me through an embodiment meditation. Now, I had done meditation for years. I had done yoga, I'd done journaling, I'd done all those things. How I would differentiate an embodiment meditation, just it's so subtle, but a lot of meditation out there is kind of about us rising above our bodily sensations, this a little bit like, transcending our human experience. Whereas an embodiment meditation is about going deep down into it. It is about connecting to those physical sensations, letting your body move and sound in different ways, and really getting down and dirty with all of those like bits of your humanness that's inside. And as she guided me through this for about 15 minutes, I discovered, basically she asked me at the end of it, she was getting me to connect with the anxiety that was within me that had been tormenting me all these years. And at the end, I was able to say, I have absolutely no idea what I felt. I have no idea what that anxiety felt like. And the moment, it was like a light bulb moment coming on of all these years I have spent running from this anxiety in absolute terror and fear of it. I couldn't even tell you what it really feels like. I just know that it feels uncomfortable in my body, but I have no connection to what those sensations actually are. And that was a massive moment for me. And it's why whenever people come to me now and say, oh, what if this might not work for me? And I'm not really able to, I don't really know what's going on in my body. I have no concerns whatsoever, because even realizing that you are not connected to what's going on in here can be the biggest moment of change that you'll ever have. Because from that moment, I was able to see that this was the missing link in the chain. I was always running, always trying to solve this feeling of anxiety within me, but I was so cut off from it that I didn't even really know what it was. So I went through a 6-week course with them and a self-guided course too. And I began to learn the tools of embodiment. I began to experience that. So, what this involved was learning how to really connect and be with the physical sensations in my body rather than in the mental concept of what they are. And that's where you go back to that therapist that I saw so many years previously who said, you think your feelings rather than feel your feelings. This is where I was learning how to actually feel my feelings. I started learning how the physical sensations in my body shift and move and transform when we give them our conscious awareness. And I started to also learn how there is a purpose and a value to each of our emotions and sensations, even if it is not literally about the situation in front of us right now. So that anger that's coming up may not be about the person who's just said something that seems annoying, but it still has value. It is still indicating to me something about a boundary within me that needs my attention. And this is really where I went into just an obsession. This was where I was like, and then I feel like a good one. It was like I had been led by this trail of breadcrumbs to embodiment work, and now I could not get enough of it. I was reading every book that I could. I was listening to podcasts. I was doing teachings everywhere that I could find online. And I stumbled upon the Feminine Embodiment Coaching Certification Conference, which was a free online conference which talked about embodiment not only on a personal level but also on a systems level. So throughout this whole time as well, I've been working as a political campaigner with an interest in, feminism, education, environmentalism. And suddenly what this conference was also doing was showing that this disconnection that so many of us have to ourselves is also the fundamental root of so many of the systems of oppression in our world, and our disconnection to the earth as well. So it was almost like people had just like pulled back the curtains and this sunlight was suddenly beaming in of, oh my gosh, everything makes sense now. I decided to sign up to do that coaching certification at that point with no intention necessarily of actually offering coaching myself, but just because I wanted to pour myself into the work. And I spent a year studying it, and there was a huge amount of personal mastery required within it. So I spent hours, of hundreds of hours, moving through the sensations in my own body. And they always say, they kind of tell you after a while, yeah, you'll make a lot of changes in your life when you go through that certification, because suddenly when you're connecting to yourself, you can't ignore these things anymore. And that was absolutely the case. Before I'd actually graduated, I had left the full-time job that I was in. So this is where we're coming to the post transformation, although I don't even like to call it post transformation because we're always changing, we're always continuing. Even, since doing that course, I've gone on to study other forms of embodiment in Celtic mythology, in wealth, and in money, how we connect to that. And I still feel like I'm completely changing, all the time. But the biggest transformation that I really went through was that life had gone from something that I had to figure out to something that I was here to experience. And in that deep experiencing, everything just became easier. So I've noted down just like a couple of things. Well, who am I? Who is Sarah after the transformation? So, Sarah, after the transformation, I had fallen in love with myself. And I said to you, at that point, whenever I was going through the panic attacks, that I hated my body. My body was my enemy. This was really the biggest fundamental shift that it was that was made for me. Because as I sat with all of those different layers, first of all, the layer of hatred and frustration, and just accepting that yeah, fair enough, I was going through a hard time, that is reasonable. But then I was going deeper and I was connecting to all of that anxiety and all of that panic that had been there in the first place. And I started to really see that in each of those experiences, my body was like staging a rebellion against the programming and against the defensive mechanisms that I had held on to since a child. It was saying, no, you're not going to go back to work and just ignore this thing. You're not just going to keep going and pretend that nothing's wrong. Sit down, slow down, come back to yourself. And within the relationship anxiety as well, I started to learn and discover and see that even there, it was really highlighting that I did not know how to be myself in relationship with another person, because I had ignored that, from a child, from the level of a child. I had often been, treated that I was too sensitive, that I just needed to be more accommodating to others, and I had learned to be accommodating to others. So when I went into relationships with people, I kind of lost myself. I didn't know how to express my needs, my wants, my desires. Didn't know how to tolerate other people's disappointment or anything like that. And then I got even to the level of sitting with those physical sensations, my heart, my little broken heart, blocked heart. And I could see that although that was hard, that was a hard experience, but one, my body was doing the absolute best it could the whole time to keep me alive. Every palpitation, every broken beat was pumping blood around my body. And that experience of heart block brought me back to myself. Without a pacemaker, I would not be here right now. I would not have gone down this route of embodiment. And I am so grateful. I am so grateful. And this was where, yeah, I fell in love with myself, not on a conceptual level of deciding that I like all these characteristics about myself. It's like I fell into the physical experience of the deep love that there is within me for me at all times, at all times. That was number one. Number two, I was no longer afraid of challenging emotions. So I was no longer afraid of the feeling of fear. I was no longer afraid of the feeling of guilt. I was no longer afraid of the feeling of disappointment or rejection. They're still not my favorite thing in the entire world to experience, but I knew that I had the ability to feel those things. And so that made me bolder. That made me more daring with life. I relearned to drive after having not driven for 10 years because I was afraid of it. And I got my little car. I quit my job and I traveled around Ireland for about 6 to 8 weeks, visiting some of the sacred sites that I'd learned about during my Celtic embodiment. I started my business. I decided, yes, I am going to share this with other people because this has been so transformative for me. And I will say, I am not a natural business person. Like, I am not one of these people who's like, oh, I've started a business and I'm just in love with business. Absolutely not. I just love sharing this work with people. And because I'm not afraid of the challenging sensations that come up when you do scary things, I'm able to keep doing the things I want to do, even whenever there's challenges that come along the way. And it also just made me bolder in my personal life. I started being more open about how I felt. And so I started making more meaningful connections with people. And the third thing was that life became more vibrant and more joyful. Not all the time, but I was able to move through the full spectrum of emotion. So, one of the worst things about relationship anxiety and OCD was that I felt numb a lot of the time. I felt like I had a tiny spectrum of emotions that I could access, and that was it. And as I started being able to expand into more and more emotions at all sides of the scale, I was able to access and feel more joy in my life. And to people looking at me, there's maybe not an awful lot that has changed in my external life, but there is so much that has changed within me. And that brings me to the final thing, which is quite simply, and it brings us really lovely full circle, is that I developed this bedrock of self trust and confidence within myself that really is just unshakable. You, I still have ups and downs in life. We all experience challenges, but there's something in my life at the moment that has been going on. And I was speaking to somebody about this yesterday, saying that if I had gone through this a few years ago, it would have been, I would have been really devastated. It would have like been really breaking me. Whereas it's something that now there is grief about, there is sadness, there is pain, but it does not take me out. And I have this deep feeling of peace and this deep feeling of I am able to handle whatever life gives me. But not only that, I actually trust life to give me exactly what I need for my highest good at all times. And when you have that self trust and confidence, you're just able to move through life and engage with life with so much more ease, so much more peace, so much more joy, and so much more appreciation of the journey than whenever you are being buffeted by the winds with no route to hang on to. So that was really the transformation. And in terms of what the future holds, I mean, I have been developing this I have been putting together, embodiment with Sarah and welcoming in some clients. And really, I just think my favorite thing is seeing other people go through this transformation as well and, get in touch with their own self-compassion. And I have discovered that my favorite way to run a business and grow a business is very slowly and very gradually. So that is what I plan and continue to do for the future. And at the moment, I'm actually focusing a little bit on kind of a niche topic, but I'm focusing on procrastination, on the theme of procrastination, because I think that for a lot of people, the thing that they encounter the most whenever they do start to do things for themselves, or they attempt to, or when they're considering their own self confidence, is procrastination. That is something that just fills so much of us with self hatred and with a lot of self criticism, but it keeps us very cut off from themselves. And actually, in my opinion, procrastination is it's a teacher and it's a guide and it's there to support us. And it's kind of like all these things that have happened in my life that have felt like a setback. They felt like they're pulling me back. They felt like they're getting in the way. Those things that felt like they were getting in the way were actually showing me the way. And so I have been developing a body of work at the moment around procrastination. And if you are interested in exploring that more fully, you should definitely get onto my mailing list to see what's coming out in the year ahead.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. I also did the stress control and that's why I do what I do, because I kind of thought I, like you, had a panic attack that was so big I thought it was a heart attack. And it was only when I was sitting in their classes and they explained the anatomy of the two and how close they are. I was like, because you just, when you have such a big panic attack that's a heart attack, and then somebody tells you, no, it's a panic attack, you just feel stupid. But when somebody explains the anatomy of it, you're kind of like, oh, it's not so bad. It's not so bad that I confused the two with each other. I was sitting all through that. I put the view on so that the viewers can see you, the audience can see you. But I was sitting nodding and smiling. My smile was so big it was nearly off my face, because that's kind of all the stuff I teach. And it's amazing how when I say to people, just sit with the emotion and ask it what it's trying to teach you, because it's not, you're not angry about what they've said. That's a trigger for something from long ago. And if you can get to that trigger, then they won't be able to trigger you anymore if you get to the original, because you'll take that away and you'll understand it. And it takes a little bit of work. Or let's be honest about this. It's not something you go, yes, I'm feeling wee tingling in my left shoulder. Oh, yes, that means that. Oh, okay, that's fine. That it takes a little bit more than
It's a
that.
skill. It's a
But
skill.
it's
The
fabulous. And to have a great guide like yourself to guide somebody through the process and how to go, because it can mean for some people that they have little bits of their breakthroughs really do look like breakdowns.
yeah.
There can be lots of tears and lots of and even in my experience with some of my clients, it can cause a bit of a panic attack, because it's this first time they've really felt these emotions, and it almost feels like, if I give in to this, I'm never going to get to the other side of it. I'm going to start crying and I'm never going to stop. And you just, there's that holding their hand and going, everything passes. Every
Yes.
storm passes. Every rain cloud eventually runs out of rain. You're here, you're safe, it's fine.
That's
Um,
where the self-trust comes in. The
it does.
self-trust develops naturally when
From
you
that.
start to experience the truth that your emotions will rise to a peak and then they will fall,
Oh,
and
yep.
you can still be there in the midst of it. But most of us, we never let ourselves get to
No.
that point, never go there. So you
But
never discover.
for me, there's a whole pile of things in that, and I discuss this obviously with all my clients, and in my classes. We're not taught to. Our
No.
society doesn't. We are taught because the first thing I wrote down there was being good to protect myself. Is that
Hmm.
you are taught to sit down, sit still, be at peace, and be quiet.
Yeah.
And
100%.
particularly for females, I don't know whether
Yes.
for your age group or not, but certainly for my age group, it was be seen and not heard.
100%. And I do take a very feminist lens on my work. I think that really patriarchy lives in our body. The systems of oppression live within our body. And I believe that systems of oppression are actually belief systems that cut us off from the essence of who we are. And that's how they operate. And they operate through us and around us. And that is why this work of reconnecting to yourself and coming home to yourself is the work of liberation. It is liberatory work. It moves you beyond the structures that have been placed around you. And
Oh
that
yeah,
is partly why, I still work as a campaigner as well as running my business. And I see the two as being completely intertwined on another level, that when we do come home to ourselves, you cannot be manipulated anymore. You cannot be
no,
told to sit
no,
down and be quiet and that
no,
you don't matter and that
no.
you can't take up space and that you just have to do what other people have told you to do. Because when you feel the truth of who you are within you, no one else can talk you out of it. But you have to get through a few layers
Oh,
first.
oh, you really
You
do.
have to.
The peeling of the onions. Um,
Hmm.
so the reason I'm laughing and doing this and all the rest is that on the 17th of April, I launched my new program called Liberate Your BS. And you
Oh.
can call it belief system or best self, whichever one you want.
Hmm.
You pick whatever BS means for you, but it is precisely that because the cohort that I have just come through, um, every single one of them that I was beta testing the program.
Hmm.
Every single one of them had this drive that they had to do all of this stuff to prove themselves. And
Yes.
that's not your story. That
Hmm.
some of it's society, some of it's religion, some of it's our schooling, and some of it has come from your parents and from
Hmm.
their parents and from their parents. And it's not that our parents do this deliberately to us
No.
to make things horrible or awkward or whatever. It's usually because it was done to them as well.
Hmm.
But it also comes from a different time. So um this whole idea that we can have it all, absolutely we can have it all, but you're going to be fucking knackered. You're
Yeah.
going to be absolutely, if you're working full time, you're raising children, if you're blessed to have children, you're keeping the house and you're running those children to gymnastics and football and you're going to be
Hmm.
knackered. So give yourself a break because our mothers
Hmm.
generally at my age, not at your age, but at my age, didn't have to do all that.
Yeah.
And our grandmothers certainly didn't have to do a lot.
I
Again,
mean,
age.
it's worth people reflecting on. If you're trying to prove your worth, it's because you believe that your worth can be in doubt.
Yes, absolutely. And
The
it can't,
only reason you would be trying to prove your worth is if deep down you
you
feel that
don't
your worth
believe.
is not
Yeah,
actually
absolutely.
solid and secure. And that
Absolutely.
is why we can also be that's how we end up being manipulated on by society. That's how
Yeah.
you end up being, going beyond your body's capacity. Because obviously, I've told one aspect of my work, but so
Yeah,
much
yeah,
more comes
yeah.
into it as
Oh
well,
no,
of like
absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
cycles and rhythms and
20, I teach that as well. We are
yes.
28-day cycles. We're not, men are 24 hours
Yeah,
and our whole society is built in 24 hours. We're 28 days.
exactly.
And while we
Hmm.
try and fit that 24 hours, we're making our body and our bodies. And I loved you said something else um, that made me think of the whole thing of your body will whisper
Hmm.
and then she will talk to you and
Hmm.
then she will shout at you and then she will
Roar.
scream at you.
Yeah.
And that kind of the whisper will be, we pain in my elbow.
Hmm.
Um, to COVID to cancer. This
Yeah.
you will, and I mean, not that's not anybody's, but you
No.
keep until
Mm-hmm.
she will make you ill,
Yeah.
really ill, because you're not listening to her.
Yeah.
I love Gabor Mate and Brussels, the body
Yeah.
says so, and Brussels Vaughan called the body keeps the score.
Mm-hmm.
So it's that whole thing of listen to her when she's whispering, and she'll
Mm-hmm.
never have to shout.
Yeah. And you
But
know
you're,
what? Even when we know all of this, though, I will say, like, because
oh no, oh absolutely,
I've had some gut problems and stomach problems as of late. And like, I know perfectly well that
yeah,
that is my body, like, that she was whispering and she was whispering and she was whispering. And I didn't listen. I didn't
yeah.
listen. And now she's not quite roaring, but she's just talking
She's starting to
loudly.
shout,
She's like,
starting to
excuse
shout.
me, you need to do something
Hello.
about this. So even when we know this, but I think it's the continual practice, because we are rewiring a way of being, because
Absolutely.
we are in a society that tells us that you are supposed to get your body to do what we want it to do.
Yeah,
And then we are learning a whole new way of being, of
yeah,
going that actually my body knows the best thing to do, and it's my job to listen to it and to respond and work
yeah.
with it. And that takes I think that will take a lifetime of practice.
Does it does. So yes, you said at the beginning about or at the end, I feel like I'm still transforming. Everybody
Mhm.
does. I like you believe we came here to experience life, which means
Mhm.
experiencing all the emotions, how no matter how uncomfortable that is. Um, so we will, and when you get to a level, then something else will come along to,
Yeah.
have you really learned that lesson? Are you
Yeah.
really embodying this? Are you really going to listen to me? And
Mhm.
stuff happens. We were doing something for the first time ever. We were doing a quiz. I was going to be using a microphone. Hate microphones. I think I'm quite loud. I'm quite good. When we didn't have microphones when I was doing speech and drama in school and acting and all that jazz. So I'm not really very and I completely, yeah, I was really nervous, even though I
Mhm.
know all this stuff and I know how to do it. So absolutely. And your procrastination, I love the idea of that. For me, procrastination, we could come on and do this as a completely separate topic, but for me,
Mm.
procrastination is the body trying to protect itself.
Yes.
It's trying to say,
Yes.
I'm not re I don't have the confidence to do that yet. So
Mhm.
we just hold back a wee minute.
Yeah.
And you really, again, sit with the emotion and go, okay. And I kind of see it. We could get into this about the nervous system and the amygdala and all the rest.
Mhm.
So my little amygdala is my inner child.
Ah.
So I keep
Mhm.
that on my desk. And when I feel any of that stuff, I kind of look at her and go, okay, baby girl, what's going on? Why
Yeah.
why are we afraid of this next step?
Mhm.
People are gonna see us. Or,
Mhm.
somebody's gonna contradict what we've said because somebody's more intelligent than us, or whatever it might be. And that again is going
Yeah.
back to all those triggers from
Yeah. And it's
childhood.
a good gateway point as well for people who, I think that embodiment is something that it's still very new, it's gaining in popularity, but a lot of people are like, they have a sense that, yes, I want to connect more to my body, but I don't really get what that means. But when you describe procrastination to people, they get it. It's like you
Yes,
want to do something, but your body just won't let
won't let
you.
you.
And
Yeah,
I ran a little program at the beginning of the year where the procrastination deep dive, I worked with 5 women individually on a deep dive session all about their procrastination with some other resources all around them. And every single one, it was so much deeper than I think any of them would have guessed.
yeah,
It was never in any case, it never in any scenario that they were looking at was it just oh, I just can't get myself to move, I'm just lazy. Any of the surface level things that we apply to procrastination, it was
yeah,
always, always, always a deeper, vulnerable, gentle part of them begging them to please listen, to please pay attention to this.
yeah,
And one of them that I continued working with afterwards, who was experiencing procrastination around PhD program, actually said to me just a little while ago, this really works, because not only had she gone back to her PhD, she'd actually started her PhD sooner than her return date and was enjoying it and was
brilliant,
really embracing it. And a
brilliant.
lot of that came from permission to just be yourself and do things the way that you and your system wants to do it.
Yeah,
Because sometimes the reason that we're procrastinating on doing something is because we're trying to fit ourselves into the model of what we expect that thing to require of us, rather than allowing our unique creativity to come through.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Sarah, that has been fascinating. Thank you so much
Mm.
for spending time with us today. I finished with three questions. You can answer
Mhm,
one or all three, depending on.
mhm.
So it's your favorite book, your favorite phrase, what you would tell your younger self.
Okay. So, favorite book you've already mentioned. My favorite book is When the Body Says No: The Cost of Hidden Stress,
Well,
Gabor
well,
Mate.
nothing. Yeah.
Obsessed with that book and love Gabor Mate. My favorite phrase is by Eckhart Tolle, and it's whatever the present moment contains, say yes to it as if you had chosen it. And what I would tell my younger self is something that I still have to tell myself nowadays all the time too, but I would definitely tell my younger self that I think the answers to life are kind of like cats. If you go chasing after them, they will run
They'll
away
run
from
away.
you. But if you sit quietly and just relax into where you are, they will come up and creep beside you and crawl onto your lap.
Very good. Very good.
Mm.
I like that quote as well, but for me, I didn't realize that was Eckhart Tolle. It was always about
Mhm.
butterflies. If you chase the
Mm,
butterflies, whereas if you sit, the butterflies will come and land on you. And I
yeah.
use that with children all around a dog and a butterfly sitting on its nose
Hmm.
about the nervous system.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
so that's lovely. I love that. Very good.
Mm.
Thank you so much for sharing time with us and sharing your story. I really
Mhm.
appreciate it. Um, You'll share your socials and your links
Yes.
with us, and I put
Yeah.
them in the descriptors around. I always want to say beneath, but sometimes they end up
Hmm.
wherever. So, but with they will be the links will be on YouTube and Spotify.
Hmm.
Sarah, thank you so much indeed.
No problem. Thank you so much.